begin with a Fox News alert as Vice President Pence travels to Las Vegas this afternoon to try and help that city heal, saying that as a nation, we have hope. You know, it is 1 week nearly after that deadly mass shooting that claimed the lives of 58 people and left so many hundreds others wounded. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new hour of America's News Headquarters. I'm Shawn.
And I'm Gillian Turner in for Arthel Neville, the vice president participating in a unity ceremony where people joined together in prayer. Organizers commemorated the lives that were lost in last Sunday's tragedy with the release of a dove for each victim. Vice President Pence is taking on the role of post-disaster ambassador to help spread a message of hope and healing in the wake of this tragedy.
In America, we mourn with those who mourn. We grieve with those who grieve. And I stand before you today on behalf of my family and every family in America to say we are with you. Today, we are all Vegas strong.
Rich Edson is live from the White House with more.
Good afternoon, Gillian. And Vice President Mike Pence is still in Las Vegas. He just finished his remarks at that unity event there, less than 1 week after a gunman killed nearly 60 people in Las Vegas. During his speech, the vice president says no evil will diminish the strength of the American people.
On Sunday night, Las Vegas came face to face with pure evil. But no evil, no act of violence will ever diminish the strength and goodness of the American people. As President Trump said on Monday morning, our unity cannot be shattered by evil. Our bonds cannot be broken by violence.
This just in for the network pool that's traveling with the vice president. The vice president and his wife are visiting the memorial of crosses that have been set up near where that shooting happened about 6 days ago. Meanwhile, back here in Washington, Democrats are continuing to push for more gun control. Republicans, especially House Speaker Paul Ryan, has said that he is open to at least considering the issue of bump stocks. That was the modification that police say the gunman had made to that semi-automatic weapon that essentially turned it into an automatic weapon. President Trump, meanwhile, back here in Washington, just about to leave the White House. He's headed to North Carolina, Greensboro, where he will do a fundraiser down there. Before leaving for the fundraising event, the president, as he tends to do, tweeted. This time it was on North Korea. Quote, presidents and their administrations have been talking to North Korea for 25 years. Agreements made and massive amounts of money paid hasn't worked. Agreements violated before the ink was dry, making fools of U.S. negotiators. Sorry, but only one thing will work. This is after the president cryptically said this week, flanked by senior military officials, that this was the calm before the storm. He was asked repeatedly what that means. He says, we'll find out. The secretaries of defense and state have said the U.S. is prepared to defend the country against a North Korean attack, though the U.S. prefers and is pursuing diplomacy. There's also a deadline in 8 days, and that's when the administration has to figure out whether it's going to certify for the third time that Iran is complying with the bulk of the Iran nuclear agreement. There is discussion, and officials here are talking about a possibility where the Trump administration would certify that Iran is failing to comply with the nuclear agreement, but it would continue nuclear-related sanctions relief, essentially keeping the United States in the Iran nuclear deal together, and punts the issue to Congress, which would make the decision whether to withdraw the U.S. Gillian, back to you.
We'll have more on the Iran nuclear deal later in the show. Rich Edson, thanks so much.
And as Rich just said, the Vice President and Mrs. Pence, there you see live right now. It is a very emotional moment, heart-rending and heartbreaking. The memorial of 58 crosses in Las Vegas, the balloons, the flowers, the proud American flag, 58 for each victim who was killed in that senseless slaughter. As you know, they lost their lives in the worst mass killing, terrorist attack, really, in American history. These type of events and these type of tributes honor those who have been lost. You see the white balloons, the doves released earlier. Let's just watch for just a moment and listen as the Vice President of the United States and Mrs. Pence inspect each memorial. A solemn, emotional tribute. You saw the vice president touching the signs with the names. A moment of him offering his honor and thoughts and prayers as the nation after this horrible event. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the president is not giving up on repealing Obamacare. Mr. Trump tweeting that he called Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer to talk about what he said the, quote, great health care bill. This after the administration dealt another blow to the Affordable Care Act, rolling back the law's birth control mandate. The big question now, will the president get the Democrats on board on a new health care plan? Kristen Fisher explains.
At the same time the Trump administration is dealing this pretty big blow to Obamacare, the president is also continuing to try to cut a deal with Democrats about a health care bill. He said this morning on Twitter, quote, I called Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, yesterday to see if the Dems want to do a great health care bill. Obamacare is badly broken, big premiums. Who knows? But Schumer seems a little less optimistic. He says that the president wanted to make another run at repeal and replace, and I told the president that's off the table. If he wants to work together to improve the existing health care system, we Democrats are open to his suggestions. But working together with Democrats will only be even more difficult after what the Trump administration did just yesterday. It expanded the exemptions for the Affordable Care Act's contraceptive mandate to include moral objections in addition to the religious exemptions that were already in place.
The president believes that the freedom to practice one's faith is a fundamental right in this country, and I think all of us do. And that's all that today was about. Our federal government should always protect that right, and as long as Donald Trump is president, he will.
So before the exemption was limited to churches and religious organizations, now it's been expanded to any business, nonprofit, or even publicly traded company with seriously held moral objections as well. Well, Speaker Ryan, he called it a landmark day for religious liberty, but House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi called it despicable. And the president of Planned Parenthood, she put out a statement that reads in part, quote, the Trump administration just took direct aim at birth control coverage for 62 million women. This is an unacceptable attack on basic health care that the vast majority of women rely on. The ACLU has also already filed a lawsuit, but the White House says it's willing to take this one all the way to the Supreme Court. Eric?
All right, Kristen, thanks so much. So the big question, can the president bring Democrats to the table on the issue of health care? We will have more on that in the hour with political reporter Rachel Bade to explain. Gillian?
Now to a Fox News alert. We're keeping a close eye on Hurricane Nate. It's now expected to make landfall in Louisiana later tonight. It's currently graded at a Category 1, but is likely to strengthen to Category 2 before it strikes the U.S. mainland. Folks across the Gulf Coast are preparing for the rain and powerful winds that are likely to follow. We've got Fox team coverage with Casey Steele, who's live on the ground in New Orleans. But we begin first with meteorologist Adam Klotz, who's live in the Fox Extreme Weather Center. Adam?
Hey there, Gillian. Yeah, this storm continues to strengthen. We've been seeing it do so, and we're really knocking on the door of a Category 2 storm already. Winds at 90 miles an hour. You get up to 95 miles an hour. That's when you get that Category 2 status. Still running over water, 80 to 85 degrees. That's warm enough to continue to intensify. Now, we are seeing some of these outer bands of rain now begin to batter the Gulf Coast. That's only going to pick up here in the next couple of hours as this storm moving quickly up over 20 miles an hour. Typically, you see these things move closer to 10 to 12 miles an hour. So this is a fast mover, but as it lifts to the north, you see it jumping up likely to that Category 2 status, at least right there at it. And that's going to be happening throughout the overnight hours tonight. Now, when specifically can we talk about a landfall? Well, pay attention to this. There's your center of circulation. This is our future radar. I'll put it into motion for you. Just pay attention to where it is as it moves to the north. Now, obviously getting some very intense bands, but likely not making landfall yet at this point. There's your center of circulation. 9 p.m. All the wind, though, beginning to see storm surges here along the Gulf Coast over towards New Orleans, towards all these inlets and lakes here along the coast. This continues to move, perhaps getting 11 or midnight. It all depends on when we're talking about running over some of these barrier islands, but overnight tonight and then lingering, really slowing down once it makes landfall, at least a little bit. You're going to be talking about still just off the coast there all the way by 7 a.m. So the coast is going to be seeing a lot of heavy rain, at least at times, and then that storm surge is going to be a big part of this story. No surprise here, we're looking at hurricane watches and warnings up and down the coast. The storm surge, widespread 3 to 6 feet, but some areas probably possibly getting up to 9, 10, maybe even 11 feet, Gillian. So that's going to be one of the biggest concerns here in the next few hours.
Adam, thanks for that. We'll check back in with you later.
Well, Gillian, President Trump has approved a pre-disaster declaration for 17 Louisiana parishes ahead of Hurricane Nate's landing. You know, state officials are telling about 2,000 people there to evacuate, and there are concerns now about the city's antiquated pumping system. Casey Stigl now live in New Orleans with the very latest. He's at Lake Pontchartrain, which you can see behind Casey. And I guess, Casey, the wind and the rain is already starting, and if the wind comes over that lake, they could have some problems.
Yeah, Eric, that's what storm surge is. You know, you think about as the storm is out over water in the Gulf, and it has those extreme winds Adam was just talking about. And as it moves north and it moves east toward the shore, it pushes all of the water from the Gulf inland. And that has the potential of filling up Lake Pontchartrain here with storm surge. And water levels are already high here. So no doubt everyone living all around this lake very, very concerned about that, because I want you to take a look right down there. You can see we're not talking about a really great distance between neighborhoods and the shoreline. You can see homes and businesses right up there, so it doesn't take much. And when you're talking about a potential 6-7 foot surge in this spot, that could be problematic for the neighborhood. So the National Weather Service is saying the window of preparedness is closing quickly. Hurricane Nate is fast approaching, and as you really start to see all of the rain falling, it's widespread. New video now we'd like to show you of some of the rain falling in and around New Orleans that was shot by one of our photographers not long ago. You know, it's been falling pretty steadily for the last 2 hours or so. The mayor of New Orleans just holding a press conference saying the worst of it will likely hit between 7 o'clock tonight local time through 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers today closed 2 giant floodgates on 2 of the city's canals. This infrastructure was put in post-Katrina to help keep storm surge out of the city. The mayor says that the pumping stations in and around the city that we've been reporting on that have had widespread problems, some of the pumping stations were down. The city flooded with just a rain event over the summer, so people are concerned. However, the mayor says more than 90% of the pumping stations are now operational. He is confident they will do their job. However, some of the residents around here aren't so sure and are a bit skeptical. Listen.
The city ain't done nothing with our drainage system, and I'm worried about getting flooded out again for the second time in 2 months.
So they've been taking sandbags and moving their belongings to higher ground. The mayor just finishing a press briefing not long ago. He's telling residents to be prepared to be without electricity, possibly for up to 7 days. And nearly 2,000 energy crews are in the region on standby, ready to respond to get lines up if that is the case, to try to get power restored quickly. So a lot of unknowns at this point, as we typically have as one of these storms approaching. We just know that it's dangerous, and a lot of people are impacted, not just in Louisiana, but neighboring Mississippi, Alabama, possibly Florida as well. Lots of eyes on Hurricane Nate at this hour, Eric.
Yeah, Casey, just a matter of waiting. Certainly, we hope for the best. A week is a long time. Certainly, we'll be watching later tonight. We'll have coverage throughout the night. Thank you.
Thousands of Russians take to the streets. Hundreds of them are arrested. They've taken out to protest against President Vladimir Putin ahead. What made this day extra special for those demonstrators and perhaps extra upsetting for their president. Plus, special counsel Robert Mueller reportedly spoke with the author of the controversial Trump Dossier. So why'd the Senate Intelligence Committee hit a brick wall with the same ex-spy? A former CIA officer joins us live to give his take. And the Las Vegas massacre reignites the gun control debate on Capitol Hill.
When you take firearms away from people, you take them away from law-abiding citizens.
Of course.
Evil people who want to do us harm, they'll always have a gun, and they take away our right to protect ourselves. This is Democrats saying the state should be the only one who can protect you. You can't protect yourself.
All right, Congressman.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin getting an unwelcome gift on his 65th birthday as protesters lined the streets of Moscow. They say the protesters numbered in the thousands against Putin, gathering in downtown Moscow, waving Russian flags while chanting, "Let Navalny run." That is in reference to the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, who plans to run for president next year despite having a criminal conviction that bars him from entering the race. Other protests were reported in dozens of other cities across Russia, with hundreds of people arrested.
And despite hitting a brick wall in Congress, President Trump is not ready to give up on repealing Obamacare. The president tweeting, quote, "I called Chuck Schumer yesterday to see if the Dems want to do a great health care bill. Obamacare is badly broken with big premiums. Who knows?" Schumer confirmed the president's call, but said the proposal was a non-starter. So what happens next on health care? I want to bring in Rachel Bade, Capitol Hill's reporter for Politico. Good afternoon, Rachel. Thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So over the summer, President Trump issued essentially a warning to GOP leadership. He said, if you fail to get Obamacare repealed and replaced, or at least fail to make headway, I'm going to forge ahead without you. Is that what's happening now? Is that what these overtures to Senator Schumer are about?
Yeah, I think 100% that's what he's doing right now. I think you talk to Republicans on the Hill publicly, they say they want to tackle a repeal and replace again next year, but privately they acknowledge that it's about as likely as the Browns winning the Super Bowl, right? So that's why you're seeing the president right now reach for a different playbook. There's two strategies he's looking at. The first one is executive orders, and that's what you saw this week, rolling back Obamacare regulations on birth control so that companies and insurance groups do not have to provide birth control. Also, we're hearing talk about potentially executive orders that will allow people to purchase insurance across state lines, which Republicans love because they think it would bring down prices and premiums. However, he's also looking at something that will tick a lot of Republicans off, and that's where the Schumer call comes in. He's talking about working with a different team right now, right? Basically reaching out to Democrats saying, let's pass a big, beautiful health care bill. The problem there is that Democrats and Republicans have two totally different versions of what the health care reform should look like. So that could be an issue for him.
So if we look at Senator Schumer's response to the president, is that just a straight up rebuff, or do you see some room for the president to work with Dems on health care moving forward, or we can kind of write that one off now going forward?
Yeah, I think that there are probably 10 million reasons why you shouldn't expect a deal between Democrats and the president right now on health care. The first one being, as Schumer sort of hinted at, Democrats don't want to repeal and replace Obamacare. They want to fix it. They want to prop it up. And the president, Republicans, ran on the opposite, frankly. So if the president were to do that, the base is not going to like that. And Trump is very cautious of what the base likes. So I don't think that's likely. The other thing is Republicans in Congress have totally panned this idea, right? So Speaker Paul Ryan came out and said basically it was a non-starter. Yes, we have seen some moderate Republicans and some Democrats sit together in a room and work on a bipartisan bill, but the reality is that the majority of the majority, they don't want to do this, so I don't think it's likely.
So if he's not going to cut a new deal with Democrats on health care, and we've now started to see the president kind of dip a toe into the waters of executive action, exploring what he can get done, what he can make happen through his own prerogative and presidential power. We saw that with the mandate on birth control earlier in the week that you mentioned. Do you think that's really the long-term way forward for this president? Is it healthcare policy via executive action, or is that more of a sort of stopgap measure?
I think that that's the most likely action, at least in the near future. Not only, as we said, the birth control regulation, we're also looking at purchasing insurance across state lines, which is something Republicans have wanted to do for a long time. If the president does something like that via executive action, it would be a huge, Republicans would absolutely applaud. I think, you know, the strategies he's employing right now in terms of talking to Schumer, but also wanting to do repeal and replace, it's a little perplexing for my Republican sources on the Hill, at least, you know. It's almost like, you know, Trump is standing over the Grand Canyon or trying to straddle the Grand Canyon here, right? Which is impossible. So he talks to Democrats, and in doing so, he's alienating some Republicans. But then when he's doing things for Republicans in terms of, you know, scaling back Obamacare regulations, talking about repeal and replace, he alienates Democrats. So he's in a tough position right now. And, you know, the reality is that there's probably not going to be a lot of Obamacare repeal in the next couple of years. That's why you're going to see some smaller executive orders, I think, coming out of the White House.
It makes sense that the president, stuck between a rock and a hard place, is trying to carve out his own path forward on health care, delivering on his promises in whatever incremental ways he can do that. Rachel, we'll have more on this coming up next hour. Hope everyone will stay with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And meanwhile, the Senate Intel Committee, well, it ran into a wall itself, trying to track down that author of the notorious Trump-Russian dossier. So why are there no reports that members of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team, well, they were able to speak with the former British spy who authored that, Christopher Steele? We will ask a former CIA officer about that and what comes next in the investigation. Plus, Vice President Mike Pence making an emotional and solemn visit to Las Vegas this afternoon, and he brought a message of hope as that community holds a prayer service for the victims of last Sunday's massacre.
To all those who lost a loved one, we cannot imagine your pain or erase your sorrow. Our hearts grieve for you. We stand with you now and every day after, and we pray that God may carry you through the anguish and sorrow.
Fired from the 32nd floor in the Mandalay Bay Hotel, a lone gunman who had 23 high-powered rifles, half of them equipped with a bump stock, which made them act like a machine gun. The mass murderer, 64-year-old Stephen Paddock, a professional gambler and a loner. The only people close to him, his girlfriend and brother, have been interviewed by the FBI, and they had no idea that this was coming. Investigators have gone through Paddock's computer, his phone, his financial background, and there is nothing pointing to a motive, at least not that anything they're sharing. Now, while police and everyone else want to know why, some local residents tell me they don't have to know. Some gathered at a memorial garden today that contains 58 trees, one for each victim.
People have a misconception that our town's very transient, it's all gambling and alcohol, but we actually have a very, very strong community here.
And a lawyer has been hired to represent at least some of the victims of Sunday's shooting. He says that he's going to represent those victims and sue the shooter, MGM, and the festival organizers. And he filed a petition to have all of Stephen Paddock's assets frozen, at least until this FBI investigation is done. Eric?
All right, Dan, we'll have more on the possible motive, if there is one, later on in the next hour. Thank you. Gillian?
The mass shooting in Las Vegas is reviving the debate on gun control in America, and it seems this time around, Republicans may in fact share some common ground with Democrats when it comes to a specific piece of equipment used by the killer who carried out that massacre. Garrett Tenney has more. He joins us live from Washington now. Garrett?
Well, Gillian, that's the biggest difference this time around in the gun control debate, that Republicans and Democrats have found some common ground when it comes to bump stocks. Now, bump stocks, of course, are the devices used by the gunman in Las Vegas, which allowed him to use his semi-automatic weapons as fully automatic machine guns. While they are currently legal due to an interpretation of the Gun Control Act by the Obama administration, a group of 9 GOP senators is now asking the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to review that regulation. In a letter to the head of the ATF on Friday, the senators said, in part, unfortunately, we are all now keenly aware of how this device operates and believe that this renewed review and determination will keep our citizens safe and ensure that federal law is enforced. Earlier this week, the NRA may have paved the way for that request when it announced it supported that idea as well.
What the NRA has said is we ought to take a look at that, see if it's in compliance with federal law, and it's worthy of additional regulation. That being said, we didn't say ban, we didn't say confiscate.
And despite that agreement, Democratic leaders are criticizing these efforts, arguing that by simply changing regulations rather than passing new laws, Republicans are trying to avoid making any meaningful changes to gun control.
They're going to say if you give them bump stock, it's going to be a slippery slope. I certainly hope so. But I don't think bump stock should be a substitute for the background check.
There are already a number of pieces of legislation in the works by members of both parties, though, looking to either limit or ban bump stocks. But as we've seen time and again, Congress tends to take its time, particularly when it comes to heated issues such as gun control, which is why Republicans say changing the regulation will be a much faster way to get bump stocks off the market. Gillian?
Get bump stocks off the market, though the two companies that we know who manufacture them have been sold out for the last couple of days. So they're already in the hands of thousands more Americans. But
And
Garrett
getting
Tenney
them
will
off the street will be difficult.
Yeah, but we'll keep an eye on this and bring you more. Thanks, Garrett.
Yeah.
Well, Gillian, now there are new reports about the Russian investigation this weekend, saying members of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team, well, they traveled to Europe to interview Christopher Steele. You know him. He's the former British intelligence officer who authored that notorious dossier alleging personal and financial ties between Russia and the Trump campaign and some other salacious stuff. But this comes just days after the Senate Intelligence Committee says it hit a wall in its own investigation into the dossier. Here's North Carolina Republican Senator Richard Burr, who is the committee chairman.
The committee cannot really decide the credibility of the dossier without understanding things like who paid for it. Who are your sources and subsources? We're investigating a very expansive Russian network of interference in U.S. elections.
Daniel Hoffman joins us, Vice President for SPG, Sonoran Policy Group, former Senior Executive Clandestine Service Officer for the CIA. Daniel, good to see you.
Good to see you.
First of all, so the independent counsel investigators apparently went over to London and met with Steele. A no-go for the Senate committee, and apparently no one's saying who paid for this. Does the senator have a point?
Yeah, I think the senator has a point. I also think that from the perspective of Mr. Steele, this is an extremely sensitive and politically charged investigation, and Mr. Steele may have been concerned about sharing substantive details with our elected officials. Even if they're from the Intelligence Committee, he may have been concerned about sharing details about his sources. So,
in other words, you think that he doesn't want to have any leaks?
Yeah, I think he'd be concerned that there would be the potential that maybe some of those names of his sources, whom I suspect he may still be using, would be leaked.
In this report, you know, we've heard all about it, and a lot of these unsubstantiated allegations. I mean, it's just absolutely wild. I mean, is there any reason to put any faith in any of that stuff? And the fact that the FBI apparently was willing to pay money for it.
Yeah, well, I think that's the responsibility of the special counsel. And really, I think there's three areas about which to be gravely concerned. First, who are the sources? You know, Steele is an MI6 officer who served in Russia and did not travel there himself. He used sources who then spoke with others inside Russia to collect the information that wound up in the dossier. So who were those sources and who were their sub-sources? Secondly, what is the reporting record of these sources? I'm sure that Steele's used them in the past. For all we know, he's continuing to use them today. Has their previous reporting turned out to be true? What is the veracity of their reporting, the record of their reporting? I think that's a very important issue. And then third is the methods. How did they collect the information inside Russia, and were they potentially exposed to Russian intelligence service, FSB, scrutiny, which certainly would have caused some concern as well, because if we look at the Russian cyber intrusions in our social networking and media sites, they were seeking to spread disinformation, and I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that they saw this as a channel to spread disinformation as well.
So I mean, to talk about the disinformation, spy versus spy, I mean, you've had experience in this, that they would put something out there that's not true, hoping that it would go viral and, of course, infect the body politic.
Absolutely. If there's one thing I've learned from all the years I served in Moscow and worked on the Russia target, is that they're constantly searching for channels to spread disinformation to achieve their covert aims. And this potentially could have been another one of those channels for them to try to exploit.
Should we take this report seriously?
I think that's a question yet to be answered. I wouldn't take any of that dossier to be serious or credible yet until it is proven to be so. And at this point, we haven't proven it to be so. We don't know enough about how the report was collected or who collected it to really determine the veracity of the information therein.
And these are the type of questions, do you think, that the Mueller investigators actually asked Steele face to face?
I would hope that they did. And separately, I would hope that the Senate Intelligence Committee would ask our intelligence community to assess for themselves, what is the veracity of this dossier using our other sources and methods? Does any of it make sense? Because we certainly collect a great deal on Russia. And is it possible, if I were in a position to ask, then I would be asking, is it possible that Russia was sowing discord in our political system deliberately rather than this being some kind of accurate information? I think there are a lot of questions yet to be answered.
Yeah, do you think the Intelligence Committee has already done that, or do you get pushback, or does the Intelligence Committee say we can't talk about this type of stuff? It's not, you know, it's classified, super classified, super duper classified.
I would imagine that the intelligence community is working very closely with the Senate and the House Intelligence Committees just to get at those specific issues. But I would imagine that it is absolutely highly classified because our sources and our methods of collection on Russia are indeed very, very highly classified.
And do they give that to with the classification that the senators have? They have intelligent classified clearance for this stuff?
I would absolutely expect them to be briefed. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, President Trump has called this a totally made-up facts by sleazebag political operatives, but we'll have to see as it continues, and we'll see if Mr. Steele ever does reach these shores, and to see if he has open or closed testimony. Mr. Hoffman, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Thank you.
Of course. Gillian?
First responders and doctors in Las Vegas are being recognized for their life-saving work after last Sunday's mass shooting. Ahead, the Fox News digital health editor on how responders are able to spring into action amid danger and chaos. And new warnings for Gulf Coast residents as Hurricane Nate barrels towards New Orleans.
No one should take this storm lightly. It has already claimed the lives of at least 20 people in Nicaragua and in Honduras. And as we know from past storms, low intensity doesn't necessarily mean low impact.
At the event, there was a standby crew of approximately 16 EMS paramedic personnel from Community Ambulance. They performed wonderfully under fire, literally under fire, taking care of patients that were right there in front of them in a very bad situation. So my hat's off to that standby EMS crew.
That's the Clark County Fire Chief commending the job done by first responders that were called to the chaotic scene of last Sunday's mass shooting in Las Vegas. In situations like these, first responders and ER doctors have to make split-second decisions to save as many lives as possible. For more on this, joining me now is Dr. Manny Alvarez. He's the senior managing editor right here at FoxNewsHealth.com. Dr. Alvarez, thanks so much for being here.
You got it.
I want to get a quick temperature check from you on what happened last weekend. How did first responders do overall? What's the sentiment about that? Is this something that the victims and their families, and by extension all of us Americans, should be happy with?
I think we should be happy. I think we should be proud. It brings almost tears to my eyes because, you know, when you go into medicine, either whether you're a nurse or any kind of technical person in a hospital, you know, you go in there trying to fix problems, disease diagnosis, surgery, and so on and so forth. You know, for the last couple of years, every trauma center in the U.S., every hospital in the U.S. has had to transform itself into almost like a warlike mentality. You know, it's like a MASH unit, and we never really, I mean, we had dealt with, you know, automobile accidents and fires and things of the sort, but now it's like mass shootings with dozens of injuries that are, you know, typically found only in war fields. So the whole transformation and the quick transformation that these ER doctors, nurses, and everybody else have to undergo and react to the way that they're reacting and having the outcomes that they're having is, you know, a miracle. And it really, you know, my brothers and sisters, I can't say, you know, how proud I am of those groups of people.
I mean, one thing that was really highlighted in the wake of Vegas was just how incredible the first responders in the area were.
Yeah.
Just how seamlessly and flawlessly they were able to, as you say, expand their capacity for these people who are affected, who are victims of this shooting.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, is there a lesson that we can kind of pull out of Vegas, or are there many lessons? What are you thinking?
I think that we're learning lessons every day, and as I said, now we are in this domestic terrorist war, whether it's from terrorists or even madmen and that are creating mass shootings. So now we're learning lessons. I have to tell you, we wrote a piece today, and you could read it in FoxNews.com opinion. But what I'm saying is, nowadays we have to look at the staffing of our hospitals, and especially staffing when it comes to big areas where you're having, big parties or concerts. You have to look at bringing back first aid education to schools. Kids, I taught my kids how to do CPR, how to put on a tourniquet, how to deal with penetrating wounds. We have to get some sort of basic health first aid education back into our schools. Number two, we have to kind of teach the public that just don't wait when we have a crisis to donate blood. As soon as we have these crises, you have an uptick in blood donations, and then a week or two from now, we have again empty blood banks. So we have to kind of change the attitude where everybody's a participant. You could be, anybody could be the first responder, especially if you have somebody next to you who just got shot. So again, these skills now become sort of mandatory because everybody wants to help. And unfortunately, until all of this gets under control, we are not only victims, but we're also our participants in helping others survive.
So how do you think this should work inside American families? I know you mentioned starting early with childhood education, but what can us adults do? Is it important that we get some kind of training and then we impart that to our children, or leave it to professionals?
You could do it in many ways. You could do it as a parental unit. You could do it in schools. You can have community classes in your neighborhoods where the local firemen or personnel from the hospital can go and teach. There's many ways. The point is that we need to expose our communities more than ever on first aid, because as we saw here in Vegas, a lot of the life-saving things that happen is because the citizens took it upon themselves to put the injured, press down on the bleeding, run with a pickup truck or a taxi cab immediately to the hospital. Those things make the mortalities go down, and unfortunately, this is kind of becoming something that we see very frequently, and we have to do something and learn from it.
So the takeaway is all Americans have a role to play.
Absolutely.
Everyone can help. No gesture, no education
Absolutely.
is too small. Dr. Alvarez, thanks so much for joining us today.
All right, thanks, guys. Well, there's been another terrifying incident on the streets of London. A car, again, has plowed into a crowd, hitting a tourist hotspot, injuring a dozen people. We'll have a live report on whether or not this is another terrorist act from London next. The police in London are ruling out terrorism after a car plowed through a group of people, injuring 11. This happened right outside one of the city's biggest tourist attractions. Benjamin Hall in London now with more.
London very much on edge today after this car plowed into pedestrians in the very middle of the city, injuring 11, sending 9 of them to hospital. The car jumped the curb near the Natural History Museum in West London and plowed into a crowd of pedestrians. The incident happened in the middle of the afternoon, on a day when the Central London Museum is usually teeming with pedestrians and tourists. A man is now in custody. He was held down by passers-by and is now detained. Metropolitan Police, however, were quick to reassure the public that there is no danger, saying, quote, "The incident is a road traffic investigation and not a terrorist-related incident." However, police say they are still investigating possible motives. London Ambulance Service says most of the people hurt suffered leg and head injuries, but police say none of the injuries are believed to be life-threatening or life-changing. While this turned out not to be terror-related, it is a stark reminder of how on edge the UK is, and the police response was immediate, with streets shut down in minutes, armed police on the scene quickly. The response was a reminder of how the UK is constantly prepared. There have been 5 terror attacks in the UK this year alone, 3 of them involving vehicles. So there is a great sense of relief here, knowing that this could have been a lot worse. Eric?
That's certainly true. Benjamin, thank you so much. Luckily, thankfully, it was not terrorism, despite the injuries.
We're tracking Hurricane Nate as it turns toward the Gulf Coast. Thousands of residents are hunkering down tonight. Our team coverage continues next. And the White House signals it may pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. What that means for relations between the White House and Tehran, as well as some of our key allies.
The president isn't looking at one piece of this. He's looking at all of the bad behavior of Iran, not just the nuclear deal.